Mark, WA for Kentucky Fried Zucchini.
Thank you.
This is how he introduced himself to me. Mark taught a technician class that I took a long time ago and convinced me that radio is fun. So thank you for coming tonight, Mark.
My pleasure. Okay. Good evening, all. So now you know my call sign. I say Kentucky Fried Zucchini because people go, is that KFC? No, I'm not selling chicken. Okay. All right. So I will let them stage right, stage left me on this thing here. My name is Mark, WA4KFZ. If you want to get a hold of me, my call sign, or my email address is wa4kfz@cox.net. Okay. So feel free to contact me later. The topic tonight relates to the AREDN mesh network equipment and tests that I've been conducting at the Marine Corps Marathon. Show of hands here. How many people volunteer for the Marine Corps Marathon? Okay, good number of people. How many people have thought about volunteering for the Marine Corps Marathon? Okay, better. Okay, does anybody know Tom Aslin, N4Z? He used to be N4ZPT. Okay. So when I first got into D-Star, he said, "Oh, you got a D-Star radio. You should come help us with the marathon." And I got sucked into the vortex ever since. It's been an interesting experience. It's interesting to watch the Marine Corps Marathon because the people who put on the event and schedule the medical communications and the race coordinators, they actually refer to it as what they call a planned mass casualty event, which sounds odd, but they treat it as a training exercise for Navy corpsmen. They even bring in personnel from residents from other hospitals in other cities to teach them what it's like in a mass casualty event. So it's a good practice exercise for them. And it's a very big, high-profile race. I would say it's probably just a couple notches down from some of the big ones like the Boston Marathon. But they call it the People's Race because the entry requirements are not as stringent as something like a Boston Marathon. A lot of people use it as a stepping stone, and it has high visibility because it's in the National Capital Region. All right, so anyway, let me go through what I've got here. Okay, for a number of years, for the medical communications, this is just information that goes into a runner database. This is information that pertains to any health or other status on the runners that are on there. Occasionally, this also ties in with the progression of the race at the various mile markers. But the interest started in using D-Star as a means of communication for both voice and data and being able to send medical information. Well, the reason they liked D-Star was they liked this, what I would call security through obscurity. Because at the time, the average person would not be able to just buy a typical scanner and listen in on typical FM communications. They can certainly listen in on analog FM, but unless they had a D-Star enabled radio with the ambi decoder in there or whatever, they're not going to hear anything. The other advantage with D-Star was ICOM came out with a high-speed, and I'll use that in quotes, high-speed digital radio they called the ID1. And it ran at 1.2 gigahertz, and it ran at a whopping 128 kilobits a second, which is blazing fast for the time when it came out. And a lot of people who were involved in the marathon get very excited about using the ID1s for data transfer, because the next step down from that was just 9600 baud packet. So they were looking for ways to be able to exchange digital data and to be able to enter runner information, medically related runner information, into a central database. The one thing that's very important for the marathon is the accuracy of the data that goes into that database, the medical tracking information. They actually will have to go back later and account for each individual that had a medical incident in the race there. And they do that for legal reasons. They do that also for practice, okay, just to make sure that they have all these systems set up right. But they will actually pursue this. They want to know if somebody comes in that they were treated or not treated, that they left, if they left on their own volition, or if they were treated and released or whatever. There's just a lot of concerns about liability. All right. So anyway, getting down to this, the ID1s have been used for a number of years and was a pretty good solution. The problem with the ID1 though is it never caught on here in the US. Given the terrain that we have here in the US, 1.2 gigahertz is not the greatest solution for something that is essentially line of sight. And these radios were really intended for more of a line of sight operation. In Japan, they were more popular because in Japan, they have more mountains and volcanoes and they have a lot of flat land. So they put all the repeaters up at the high spots. They can look down over a flat area, or conversely, if you're in flat areas, it's a lot easier to do point-to-point communications. But here in the US, between foliage, between all the hills and valleys and buildings or whatever, it's just not the greatest tool for that kind of communication. So it never really caught on. So in the end, ICOM has now abandoned selling the ID1s. So that's now off the table. Okay. The 9600 baud packet is considered the backup mode for getting digital data into the runner medical database. And unfortunately, that initial effort of getting the packet system set up and running was kind of a kludge, a hack job that somebody did to just take the bare bone packet commands, extract the data, and just get it into the database. If you know of hams that are good at writing software, this would be a perfect opportunity for somebody to clean up the user interface, whether they use something like, I'll call it like a DRATS, or I'm sorry, yeah, DRATS equivalent, where you just have a form and all you exchange is just the field data. But that's one area that could really stand to be cleaned up. But the one advantage is you can still buy 9600 baud enabled radios. Okay. So, what are your alternatives? Well, clean up 9600 baud, get a better interface. Or, let's look at some of the new technology that's out there on the market. So, in the last couple of years, there's been a lot of effort in utilizing commercial grade equipment, reflashing it, hacking it, and making it ham grade or ham radio use equipment. So there are guys out in California and a couple other areas that started something they call the Amateur Radio Emergency Data Network, or AREDN. And what they did is they started taking a lot of these commercial point-to-point Wi-Fi systems that were out there. They got into them, they hacked the firmware, and they added a mesh networking capability, which is not normally what these radios would do. Normally these radios are intended for what they call point-to-multipoint. So there would be a wireless service provider with a tall tower, and they service a whole bunch of homes out in some area. Here we're doing mesh networking where each node has its own same protocol and level of connectivity, and if one node drops out, others can help route the traffic around. So that gives that a lot of network resiliency, something they don't have to worry about in the commercial world. So these guys were very clever. All right, really got to hand it to the people who are smart enough to know how to do this kind of stuff. There's one key advantage, though, with the equipment that they are using as opposed to some of the very early mesh network stuff that was being done. The very early mesh network stuff was done with these old Linksys routers that are just commercial routers, and people love them because you could go to a hamfest and you could buy it for 15 bucks and it was so cute and you could clean it up and take it home. Well, the problem is it only operates in the commercial 2.4 gigahertz spectrum. And I'm going to show you why that's a disadvantage. The guys who have been doing the AREDN stuff with some of the equipment, primarily a brand that's called Ubiquity, they hacked into the radio chip itself and found that they can actually operate outside of the standard Part 15 channels allocations that your commercial routers would have to contend with. And in fact, they can operate down into what is actually truly just the ham radio allocated bands. So if you do the channel allocations, channel 1 is the bottom end of the 2.4 gigahertz Part 15 allocation. So they actually just started calling these negative channels, okay? And these negative channels, -2 and -1, are actually truly ham radio only. They're not shared spectrum at all right? And I'm going to show you why that's advantageous for us. So the nice thing is there's shared spectrum that we could access if necessary, but we have our own allocation here for 2.4 gigahertz. There's also allocations in 3.4 and 5.8 gigahertz as well. All right. So one of the nice things, if you go to the AREDN.org website, they have a nice graphic. I just stole this from their site. And they show the various bands, and they show this overlap arrangement here. So this is pretty cool. We're ham radio operators, we're licensed, and we can start leveraging their gear and operate just in the ham bands.
Has there been a problem with collision on the shared band?
Yes, and I'm going to get into that in a minute. Okay, so what would an AREDN-enabled node look like? All right, well, here's a kind of sort of typical node here. Everybody go to the Ham Fest and buy these, you know, typical mass or whatever. Okay, plug one into an AC source, a generator, whatever, or you can get battery-enabled power supplies. Plug it into your computer, you're ready to rock and roll. Okay, so this is an omnidirectional node right here. Now the nice thing about these is this is the entire radio. Okay, this little white thing on the bottom here is the entire radio. This is your antenna. The nice thing is there's an end connector. You can take this radio off, and with an end connector, I can hook it up to other antennas. So I can do a mix and match and just leave the radio as being the same radio. Okay. So you do have these options for reconfiguring things, you know, as you go. Put this down without hurting us. So basically, if you go through, look at a typical node configuration. The antenna that I got there is just the 9 dBi whip. Here's the radio itself. The radios come usually in either just a plastic case, which is the more common one they do for cost reasons in the commercial world, or some of them came in a metal enclosure to make them a little more rugged. I recommend the metal enclosure, just like I said, for rugged handling or whatever, but they all function the same way. So antenna, radio, power is sent through the Ethernet cable. Sent through the Ethernet cable, power supply brick, plug the other end into your computer, you're good to go. So if you add it all up with a couple of bucks for some masks here, you're looking at probably about $250 a node. Now, which is actually, when you compare that to what the ID1 was, the ID1 radio was on the order of about $1,200, okay, each. All right, you can put a lot of nodes out there for not a lot of money, for basically a handheld price. So, I had a lot of people initially when there was some beginning interest in AREDN and mesh networking, and at the time people were still using the Linksys routers that were out there, the cute little puppies as I like to call them, and everybody's like, oh, we should run all those on channel 1 and operate, you know, in the commercial spectrum and all that, and we can still use these little cheap routers and all that, and I was like, nah, not happening, okay, and they're like, why? But it's great. I said, it's cheap. I said, so what? It's not the way you want to go. So I did a test to try and prove my point. So in 2015, I took my AREDN node, I set it up at the medical tent. I work at the medical Alpha tent. Just set it up, did my normal thing or whatever, and just set the thing up and said, I'm just going to scan and sniff the environment and just listen. Okay. So I set it up, and what you found out was you are saturated by interference from everybody else's commercial system that's out there. So this was a scan with an AREDN node at high noon, which is basically when all the runners are starting to come back into the finish line, or the fit runners are coming back into the finish line. I guess this got kind of cut off me. I'm going to tilt the projector a little bit. But anyway,
so that's your computer.
No, that's the screen pro.
Oh, okay. All right, it's
Zoom?
Oh, it's, yeah, no, it's just the resolution. Don't worry about it. Okay, but basically, dozens of people are out there at any one time. You're now what they call interference limited. It doesn't matter how strong your signal is or whatever, you have to contend with all the interference from all of the other signals that are out there. And that includes all of what I'll call the transient signals, all the people coming in with their own little portable MiFi hotspots, you know, that type of thing. So I said, this is not good. This is also going to limit the range that you can operate between nodes if you're interference limited. So really the key is this, you're interference limited. It's not a power problem or an antenna problem. You got too much stuff out there. So in 2016, I pulled out my back and didn't attend the marathon. I remember Kerry came to my house and I loaned him my equipment and he was like, don't move, don't move. All right, so 2017, I was healthy enough to go back, and this time I took 2 nodes and I flashed them to operate at channel -2, all right, in the ham-only band. And I said, I want to just see and compare the performance from 2015 to 2017 and just see how it works. I didn't want to promise operation. I just wanted to sniff the environment and just make sure that, that I'm on the right track here. So I set the radios up. They're operating at channel -2 in the ham portions of the band, and just said, I'm going to examine the link performance between 2 nodes before, during, and after the race. So what I did was, I cut off the graphic here. I'm going to see if I can fix this because
Yeah, it's the resolution.
it's the resolution. Because I got a bunch of stuff that's going to be right at the edge.
Your mouse is on the other screen.
You don't mind me adding, Ubiquiti makes a good grounding unit 2 for your Ethernet cable. Like,
Yeah.
Pretty balls.
Thanks, Rick.
You would notice
You're saying pretty balls? Is that what you said?
You guys have dirty manners.
I'm asking. I didn't say anything.
So what happened to my son-in-law school? Mr. Bill Flame.
People were distracted by the presentation, so.
I got it. It's made it back here, so. Anybody sign up on it?
How about
Try
just
going
the
to it.
Control minus?
No, 1024 by 768. Widescreen.
Yeah, if you're trying to-
It's the aspect ratio of the PowerPoint presentation itself.
All right, good doctor, help him out.
I mean, I even practice this at home. But
Well, don't you know this is how all presentations
that's
go?
right.
They do.
What, you think the PowerPoint is set for an aspect
If you made
ratio?
it in a widescreen aspect ratio, even if you change it, you set it
So I'm gonna go back and
Now you get all the people giving their.
See if you can put a
Right,
screen on.
they say that I was crazy with the pretty balls.
Zoom out so that you can.
Well, I didn't change that part.
No, you're right.
you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna get out of PowerPoint.
There they are, pretty balls.
Let's go to PDF.
Lovely love.
We're
Yeah.
talking about heads, right?
Yeah, let's go broken. Way too much.
Everybody
Heads.
sign?
That's what you meant.
Of course, who are you thinking?
No, I'm just repeating what you're saying. I'm trying to help out, don't make it worse.
Right there, right there.
There you go.
right.
Reasonable. There you go.
And now I just
No, put it back.
flipped back.
Well, once it's in presentation rather than just showing the.
All right, let me get out of the presentation.
We take your word for it, that's okay.
Yeah, that'll show the whole thing.
All right.
Yeah, there we go.
You'll have to do it by hand. You want somebody to push. the
This
button?
will actually make the point that I want to make later.
You need a whiteboard, Mark? You just wanna-
No, I don't need a whiteboard, okay? This will make the point that I want to make. Anyway, all right, back at the scene of the crime. Okay, ran the test, operated at channel -2, sniffed the environment before, during, and after. So what I did was, I had one node sitting at the medical B tent, and I'm sitting at medical A, and I set up a link between these 2 points here. These are the other medical tents that are along the course here, or along the finish line. So what I did was, in Med B, nobody was sitting over there to help me do this test. What I did is I took a Raspberry Pi, set the thing up as a web server, and just put up a static web page. That's all there was, just a static web page. And back at the medical A tent where I was sitting, I would just hook up my laptop and periodically just refresh the screen and just do some data metrics and measurements or whatever along that period of time. So the Raspberry Pi was nothing more than my remote operator. So the distance between those two sites was about a quarter mile. All right. The other thing was the distance between them is actually blocked by some trees, and the terrain isn't exactly perfect. In fact, one of the things I would do is further up on the Iwo Jima Memorial, I would actually have like another relay node, and that would really help things as well. So I did a scan here, looked at the performance, like I said, before, during, and after the race. But the important thing was there was no interference observed.
None.
None. Okay. Nobody else was on there. There were two nodes, moi and the Raspberry Pi node, and that was it. Before the race and after the race, I was getting data rates on the order of about 30 megabits a second. All right. The radios can operate up to 100 megabits a second. I said my threshold is if it's 10 and above, I'm good to go. Okay. So I was doing about 30. During noontime, when all the runners start coming in, they start entering the vicinity of where the medical B tent was. In fact, if you go back and look at the race, that's the finish line right here. Here's the tent. Bodies are starting to come into the field of view here. The antennas are only up about 16 feet, all right, which is not very high. So what happened was, as people started coming in, I noticed the data rate started to drop. It dropped to about 19 megabits a second. And I attributed that to people entering the Fresnel zones of the antennas. All right. If I could get the antennas up higher, wouldn't be an issue. If I had another relay node, wouldn't be an issue. But the bottom line is, I was sitting at 10 megabits or above 10 megabits a second. Gets a thumb up, I'm good to go. Okay. So, this said it's very promising. It operated channel -2, the ham-only band. I don't have to worry about interference. The link looks like it's going to maintain reasonable performance. And you ask, why 10 megabits a second? Well, first of all, it's the bottom end of what the modems are really going to operate at. Second of all, that's roughly 100 times faster than the ID1s. Okay, so Carrie can tell the great story of last year of what happened when one of the nodes out there going through an ID1 was apparently in the midst of doing an update. Okay, and you talk about trying to do an update through a soda straw, right? And the network went, okay. Well, if I'm running 100 times faster, if somebody accidentally has something like that going on, the impact is now much smaller, okay? So there's an advantage to that. So I'm trying to get people interested in helping with the marathon, but to help set up AREDN nodes and utilize that during the marathon. What I'm really envisioning is more of an incremental approach here. I don't want to walk in with great guns and say, yeah, that's it, and we're throwing all the old stuff away. Okay, I'm not insane. Okay, I'm much more of a realist to know that you got to take this in steps here. So I wanted to break this up as something that would be done in stages. So next year, or this coming race, okay, in October, I set what I called my baseline goals. This is my minimum. My minimum was to get AREDN nodes established at each of the medical facilities, as well as up on the hill serving a relay of what we call a MedOps location. This is where the Marines have a trailer that has the internet connection, that has, it's the main entry point of the pipe, if you will. And there is a ham station that sits here, right? So what I want to do is being able to have a relay through, have communications, have the internet connection that goes back to the runner database, right, and do that. I want to set that up, and I want to make sure that before, during, and after the race, we're doing at least 10 megabits a second. Right? And then make a determination, do we think the ID1 radios can be replaced? All right. Now, the one node that's going to be a little bit challenging is this one. This guy is at the Roslyn Metro. Okay, we call him Med Echo. Yeah, we actually use Alpha Bravo Charlie. So Med Echo is the one at the end of the line here. For that, since he's sitting at the end of the line, what I was going to do was just use a mesh node like this with a reflector, because there's nobody behind him. He's just going to point back towards the other station here.
So what are the ranges for the Omni versus the dish?
Would you repeat the question, please?
Okay, what are the ranges between an Omni and a dish? It is strongly dependent on the height of the antenna.
Of course.
Okay, and any obstructions that are in the way. So, like I said, the test I ran was about 1/4 mile. After that, it is truly just a line of sight problem. And in fact, one nice thing, and I'll show you a plot, the company who makes this hardware has a very nice propagation prediction tool out there. And you can say the height of my antenna here, or my this and that, or whatever, and it goes through and does this kind of stuff. There's nothing to prevent you from going a couple of miles with an Omni node and going tens of miles with antennas that have directionality to them. The radios have more than enough power, all right? But like I said, you're going to find in our area, in a realistic scenarios, you're going to be more obstruction limited than you're going to be, you know, just pure line of sight limited.
So you're really counting on a mesh network functionality if you want to expand that to the region?
To give us a higher availability of the link, okay? If I have more mesh nodes, then I have a greater chance of being able to get around these things. For example, if this is a little bit of the beginning of an urban canyon here, where the Roslyn Metro is, and getting out to this, where Med Delta is here, all right? For example, it may be necessary to put another node or something in between here to help relay the signal out because of, you know, certain line of sight obstructions. One of the things we have to find out is, do we need another node there? Okay. But the nice thing is these nodes physically are easy to handle. You know what I mean? You're not bringing in huge pieces of gear. You're not having to do a lot of crazy stuff. If you need to stand up another node, it doesn't really weigh that much. It's something that can readily be deployed. And we're only operating for a day. All right? You set up early in the morning, conduct the race, take it all down at night, one day, and you're done. Okay?
Some of these tests can be done ahead of time too, right?
Yeah, some can. You know, one of the things you got to be careful of in the National Capital Region is when you start walking around doing things. You know? Okay. So if you can, you may want to at least tell somebody, you know, by the way, we're doing this in support of the marathon. No, we're not terrorists, and you know. But key things for me, you know, the old KISS principle: keep it simple. We currently are operating with 9600 baud packet radio and ID1s. Our security is through obscurity. To keep it simple, to avoid oops on the race day, I'm not interested in running VPN tunnels, security, just forget it, okay? just hook it up, make it operate. All right, all the waivers are signed. Anybody who signs up for the marathon, it's understood that their information is held, you know, it's being handled this way or whatever. Okay, that's it. I'm not interested in having show up on race day and somebody forgot the password and you can't get a hold of the person, or they didn't show up, and you know what I mean, and then you're up the creek. Just keep it simple. Plug it in, make it work. Okay. So the goal is to get the medical tents, the med stations hooked up. Okay, this year. Next year, we have been running a 1.2 gig D-Star repeater up on the DoubleTree Hotel, which is in Crystal City. What I would like to do is to see if we can extend the network out and set up a node with what they call a sector antenna that looks out over about 120 degrees and looks out over the race course to the various aid stations that are along there, and have them beam back to the DoubleTree Hotel, and have a link from the roof of the DoubleTree Hotel go back down to the Iwo Jima Memorial area and have a bridged arrangement there. So what I want to see is, can we put a sectored antenna up on the DoubleTree and look out over the race course? When I did a propagation prediction, it looked like I can cover everything, but one thing that was going to be iffy was, due to terrain, was accessing this one aid station that's near Rock Creek Park. All right. So I said, okay, I'm going to park this problem here for the moment, just get the majority of them, we'll deal with this. All right. I think this may actually be easily overcome by either A, getting a taller mast, or B, we end up with some other mesh nodes that can work through that. Okay. So in 2020, that's where I want to get Rock Creek Park hooked up. So now all the aid stations are running. Yes, sir?
Question. Seems like you're basically building your own private network, whereas there is a larger metro area mesh network that you could take advantage of and connect to. Am I mistaken?
Okay.
Could you repeat that question?
Okay. You're saying that it's possible to leverage a wider area mesh network. I guess my question is, who's running the mesh network?
I know the Keith that you know, on his website, he has multiple locations where the transceivers are located. And I know at my old club, on the tower, they had a mesh Omni also.
All right, so this was the MAPN network, Mid-Atlantic IP
I believe
network?
so, yes.
Okay. Ken KE2N is here in the back, and he has been one who's taken over a lot of the MAPN responsibilities. The thing I don't know about is, from what I understand of the MAPN network, it was primarily a backbone that was running along. I don't know if it has coverage down into those areas. I would have to see what their coverage is. There's certainly no reason we wouldn't consider it, but I'm looking for something that, like I said, this is bring it in for the race, do the race, take it home when you're done. Okay. Okay. Rather than depending on somebody else's infrastructure, you know, or whatever. All right.
If that other infrastructure is resident, that would make testing of locations a lot easier.
Yes, it would. So I figure if this is 2 years out, this gives us time to really begin to look at planning. And in fact, one of the things I would like to find out is, at least ask the question, can we leave a permanently installed node on something like the DoubleTree Hotel? There's also arrangements that were made where we can gain access to another place called the Jefferson Hotel, which is a couple of blocks from the mall. So there may be another location, you know, we could work with. Ben N4CV here, it's volunteer EMT, he had mentioned in Arlington County, all of the fire departments have access to all the roofs there, and the number of people are hams. So we might actually be able to get access to some of the more desirable roofs in the Arlington-Roslyn area. So
How about on top of the Iwo Jima Memorial?
We are using, we have a
Yeah.
20-foot,
Sculpture.
we have two 20-foot masts on the Marine Corps War Memorial that we're using now, and those will be available.
How about the Netherlands?
No, because several years ago, some hams went up there to put up an antenna, and they destroyed the railings putting the antenna up, and we've been banned from it.
Yeah,
That's how you do it, get banned.
that's how to do it.
The Netherlands, brilliant.
Yeah.
Sharpshooters from the White House.
Yeah. Yeah, it's, security's serious there, believe me.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Anyway, so I'd like to see if we can at least set up a permanent node. The nice thing with the DoubleTree is, like I said, you could leave a sectored antenna. It covers the majority of the race course. All right. And then, you know, see if there's other buildings that, of course, we could leverage. But definitely say, that's it for IV1s, we're done. Okay. But the other thing I'd like to do is, there's been some recent work, and there's actually some good videos. If you do a search for AREDN, and if you do a search for AREDN in the Cowtown Hamfest in Texas, North Texas, all right, somebody showed that they were able to stand up hotspots and run them through the AREDN network without having to go out to the internet, you know, operate through a reflector or anything like that. Well, if I can hang hotspots on the network, now I can have people roaming around with handheld radios. And one of the people who does roam around the entire time follows the top doctor who's responsible for the medical operation during the race. They call him top doc. And the person who follows him is also a doctor and a ham. They call him the top doc shadow. Okay, he shadows him. But he's walking around, you know, with a D-Star handheld and going hither and yon. Well, if we could have hotspots out here, we could start having handheld access going through the network as well. So I would like to look at adding hotspots, but later. You know, the key performance metric is greater than 10 megabits a second and getting access to the medical database reliably so that we can get information in. Okay?
Y'all plan to add routers at that time, like the ubiquity security device for each node? Because if you're connecting it to the internet, you want to have something filtering suit.
Well, okay, the internet comes from the Marines, all right? They give us the actual, the database sits on the internet,
Yeah.
but security is handled through them and their
You're
routers.
saying you get access to SIFRnet?
Yeah, but
No.
There would only be one edge to the internet, and
Yeah.
that would be handled by the Marine Corps.
Right.
And that's where Mark said that the top of the hill, they have a ham position there.
Yeah.
That's the gateway, and they can handle the firewall from
Right.
there. That's the only internet.
Yeah, so we don't have to do security for each node, okay? We're just gonna have this, like I said, the internet connection comes in at a central
I thought you were
point.
saying hotspots at the nodes. So
Oh, no, hotspots just for VHF, UHF handheld radios, you know, like D-Star radios, DMR, you know, that kind of thing. That's what I'm talking about.
Sorry.
Yeah.
One of the other distinctions that Mark said at the beginning was that we're putting custom firmware onto the hardware. So when we're operating out of the conventional 802.11 Wi-Fi band, so users with any 802.11 device can't connect to these AREDN nodes. They've become mesh capable, dedicated nodes to the system, and it's not something that any Wi-Fi device can connect to. That said, you could potentially hang a conventional router or switch access point off of that, but again, then you'd be in a security mode of needing to secure the network.
Yeah.
Aside from
Yeah.
the frequency shift, is it basically just 802.11 Wi-Fi otherwise?
It's
Underlying, yeah.
The 802.11 is a star topology, so it's
Usually. It does have support for relays.
The mesh allows one node to drop out without breaking communication.
Yeah, they use a thing is called OLSR, or Open Link, something routing or whatever, but that's the mesh part of it. But yeah, underlying it's 802.11. Okay, I had a question here.
Yes.
Oh, sorry, let me get the gentleman behind you here real quick. Yes.
Can the Marine Corps group block the IP addresses that the various systems might do updates through, so people couldn't accidentally trigger an update?
Let me answer that question. The people running the The network is set up by people who know what they're doing, but it's run by idiots.
Okay.
Succinct.
Yes, okay.
So we need to stand a Windows update server.
So, yeah, so limited capability for controlling this stuff. But like I said, the one advantage I look at it is even if things go wrong, the advantage is, like what happened last year was somebody's computer was doing a virus update, okay? But if my network runs 100 times faster than it did before, its overall impact is much lower. So I'm a realist, okay? We don't sit here and run exercises every month and work the bugs out of it. Everybody's like, okay, come on down. We all hook it all up, and then you're like, oh no, and the race starts when? Okay. All right. Yes, sir.
Yeah, if it is just 802.11, just downshifted into the ham band, do you have to legally get it to send the call sign somehow?
Your call sign is, they consider that you have identified your station by entering into the AREDN screen basically or whatever. Your call sign is your ID in there, and that's considered identification. Okay.
Let me make a comment about what Mark's been saying. One of the problems with the DD, the digital data mode in the D-Star system is that when ICOM engineers engineered the connection, they were done by radio engineers, not internet engineers. And the result is that the repeater, the access point acts like a repeater. It talks to one radio at a time. And so if one radio grabs a hold of it to download something, it doesn't let anybody else in. And that's the real problem. If it's switched back and forth like a regular Ethernet connection did, it wouldn't be such a big deal. But the fact is that the ICOM engineers said, oh, somebody's going to lock in, we'll lock the two radios together until they're done. And that's where the problem occurs.
Yeah, there's a lot of things too they do in Japan that they don't do here in the US. Like I understand the radios, one thing that frustrated people with all the D-Star stuff was that it requires a static IP address. And that's apparently how that normally operates in Japan, is like for each home, you have a static IP address. Okay, we do DHCP, they don't. All right, that kind of thing.
Actually, we discovered we could do DHCP through it.
Yeah.
The group here that works with the DD mode knows more about the DD mode than ICOM America does. Okay, because I've talked to them, and Tom has talked to them, and we know more about how it works than they do.
But now that if the radio's going away,
who cares?
Okay, who cares? You know.
It's obsolete.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions on this here? Yes, sir.
How do we get involved?
How do you get involved?
He's been waiting for that.
Okay. we take the line, we do this, and we okay. Talk to me afterwards, talk to Carrie after the meeting here. I'm definitely interested in finding people willing to help out for the marathon. You know, the other thing too I think would be nice is if you're trying to get young people interested in ham radio, this is one of those things that begins to have the look and feel of what they do. But you say, oh, by the way, you're doing this direct connection and it's all up to you. And you point to them and you're doing all this stuff and it's you and you have to do the special thing or whatever. That gives them more of the challenge. Standing there with a handheld radio, I think, is pretty old school. It doesn't quite have the sex appeal that you would want. But this at least begins to generate some interest, I think, for younger people. So, you know. All right, any other questions? Anybody? Okay. My call, wa4kfz@cox.net. If you have any questions, feel free to email me. Yes, sir.
What is the density of the mesh nodes, either commercial, private, or anyone in the DC metro area? In other words, if one puts up a omnidirectional...
On the commercial channel?
No, he's talking about the density of the number of nodes in our area.
The number of nodes. If one puts up a antenna, a directory node,
yeah.
What are the likelihood of being able to connect to the mesh network?
In general, slim. However, Ken, KE2N, I would chat with him about that because he has a node that he runs up at his house, which is on Bull Run Mountain. And in fact, at work, I work in Chantilly with Ben. We set up a 5.8 gigahertz backbone link from our building at work to his mountaintop location. So we can hang things off of that. The downside is we're only on a 4-story building in Chantilly near the Dulles Airport. So it's not like we're going to have great coverage from there, but we're hoping to start hanging things off of that network. But he's got very good visibility. Earlier on, I actually took this AirGrid antenna, went about 10 miles away and did a test on channel -2, and went to one area, like on the Loudoun County side of Chantilly, and pointed back to his mountain, and I was able to connect, okay? So if you got line of sight, you can do great things. Ken is running sectored antennas, so he's got some good coverage. He's blocked, with the mountain behind him. He's not going to do anything about that, but he's got a very good field of view, coverage area from there. We would certainly encourage more people to add nodes, and that's one of the nice things. If everybody ran on the same channel, that's fine. You're just going to have more stations that are populated. Yes, sir.
You showed a map earlier that might have been mesh. Yeah.
This was.
So, but that sort of map is also available for Northern Virginia mesh.
Yeah, this is not actually what I'll call a mesh node. So what this was the company who builds the radios, Ubiquity, they have a propagation planning tool. So what I did is I said, okay, the height of the Doubletree Hotel is X. My antenna is 120 degree sector. Go. How far away can I propagate on 2.4 gigahertz? So green means good, red means not. All right. And what happened is I looked at where the Rock Creek Park was. It was just in the red area. Okay, which means I have to hop around it or do something to get around that. All right. But the advantage is I can cover the vast majority of the course just from one high location.
There are other nodes and some beams coming up and down along 80 and 60, along 66, and off Massanutten as well. I don't know if they're still active, but they were.
Yeah, I don't know. It's one of the things actually. I want to talk with Ken, find out a little bit more of where is Mapin gone. Keith, what was it, KB3TCB, I believe it was called. He was an evangelist to the nth degree for all of this mesh network stuff, okay, the backbone stuff. He bought a van with a pneumatic mast, okay, he was like, and he ended up moving out of the area. So, yeah, so Ken has really been a good point of contact for a lot of this stuff. Any other questions?
Applause.
Oh.
You can ask, I just needed that.
Okay, while it's quiet.
Sorry, I forgot to applaud. Just wanted to, mentioning High Points in Roslyn. I hear that they're going to be knocking down the RCA building, so don't put anything permanent on top of it.
Ideally, I'd like, there used to be the USA Today buildings, those airfoil. I would love to put it up there.
I've been up there. That's a problem.
What's the problem with it?
The building, the top of the building is actually a catwalk that goes around the outside, and then there's a 2-story drop.
For all the HVAC and all that?
Yeah, where the HVAC is. The catwalk is for the davits for the windows cleaners.
Right.
So you have this catwalk around the top with nothing except davits on it for the window cleaners.
Yeah.
And then you have a 2-story drop down to where the HVAC equipment is.
Well, you need a tall mast.
Well,
no, what you need to do is lash things to the davit points.
To the davits, you can do that, but then you need power. I mean, you need, with this stuff, you could probably do it with batteries. But what we were doing wasn't feasible without.
Yeah, and the nice thing, these radios, they draw about 10 watts of power. Okay, so you don't need a huge kind of power supply.
You can run them on 12 volts. You can run them on 12 volts for short,
maybe even solar.
Right. Or solar, if you can do that, if you want to lug solar cells up. That's why I said it'd be nice to leave a node somewhere.
Well, I'd assume the window washing thing has power on it to haul them up and down.
No, they do. they drop a major cable down to run the motor, and the motors aren't there. It's just the
hook points.
Yeah, it's a hollow curved devices that they stick into. They have anchors there, and they stick them into the anchors. And they bring everything up with them when they do that. I have pictures of it somewhere.
That wouldn't be
I'll find it.
Okay.
Well, you know, we have a repeater on Fair Oaks Hospital, which is up fairly high, K4XY.
Yeah, I would need to really see what the coverage is.
Yeah.
I have not looked at coverage, you know, out of the area.
That would be
here.
one thing we could probably start doing.
Well, like I said, I have baseline goals,
Good.
and there are stretch goals. And if others want to participate in doing the stretch goals and doing this research, do it.
So
Okay.
3 sector antennas will cover on top of our facility,
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah.
The facility we have access to will give you omnidirectional.
Well, it's just.
How
do the
high is
mapping.
it? How high is it? Let's see.
Yeah, whether-
If it works perfect through our antenna location is from Bull Run.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I know they're giving me the hook. Okay. Any other questions to see me later? Thank you very much. Thank you for your attention.
If somebody just needs to sign the block, Bill's got the